There is a kind of betrayal that does not merely wound the heart. It enters like a key into a locked chamber of the soul. Not gossip, not ordinary disappointment, but the kind that shatters your private mythology. The friend you trusted, the lover you defended, the future you were already living inside your imagination. When that fracture comes, something ancient begins. The old alchemists would have called it the black phase. The moment when a false structure starts to rot so that a deeper substance can be revealed. This is why betrayal feels so absolute. It does not only take a person away, it strips away the costume you were wearing while loving them. And beneath that costume, another question waits in silence. What if the betrayer outside you only awakened a betrayer already hidden within? A secret instinct that sells truth for comfort, clarity for attachment, dignity for the temporary relief of being chosen. Tonight, we enter that chamber carefully, not to justify pain, but to uncover the gold buried beneath it. In an old coastal city, forgotten now except by scholars and the sea, there is a tale of a manuscript keeper named Lucan. He was known for preserving rare pages on metals, dreams, and sacred correspondences. Young students came to him with bright faces and restless hunger, and among them was one he trusted more than the others, a quiet listener with patient hands and a talent for reverence. Lucan mistook admiration for sincerity. For months, he opened his library, his methods, even the hidden notes he kept beneath a cedar chest. Then, one winter morning, the chest stood open. The notes were gone. So was the student. The city called it theft. Lucan, after the first fever of humiliation passed, gave it a darker name, revelation. Because what broke him was not the loss of paper, but the discovery that his wisdom had become dependent on being witnessed. The betrayal exposed more than the deceiver. It exposed the vanity hiding inside devotion. This is the first shock of the shadow. We think pain enters from outside, but often it only lights a room that was already there. Jung understood something most people resist for years. Betrayal does not only reveal the character of the other person, it reveals the arrangement inside you that made the betrayal possible. Not their action. That belongs to them. But the blindness, the bargain, the silent compromise that was already living in your own psyche. This is why the experience feels spiritual, almost ritualistic. It collapses an illusion you had mistaken for reality. We like to think the mind is a courtroom where guilt can be assigned, a sentence pronounced, and order restored. But the deeper psyche is not a courtroom. It is more like an alchemical chamber, a sealed place where pain, rage, shame, and truth are forced to sit together until something hidden separates from the smoke. The real question is no longer, how could they do this to me? The darker and more useful question is, what part of me was bribed into silence? Every betrayal carries that question like a blade, and the beginning of transformation is when you stop dodging it. The ancients knew that every real initiation begins with decomposition. In alchemy, this was nigredo, the blackening, when the noble image collapses back into raw matter. In ordinary life, it arrives as sleeplessness, obsessive replay, the humiliation of seeing what you refuse to see. Betrayal is so devastating because it tears the persona from the bone. It shows you where goodness was mixed with need, where loyalty was secretly bargaining for safety, where love had become a contract with fate. If I give enough, I will not be abandoned. But the psyche is not governed by contracts. It is governed by truth. And truth enters like fire. The wound does not only ask who failed you. It asks what in you needed the illusion so badly that you protected it against your own instincts. This is the hidden cruelty of initiation. The pain is real. The injustice is real. Yet beneath both lies another discovery, that some part of you had already begun betraying itself long before the other person did. To understand this, the old storytellers used figures more powerful than argument. There is a Persian tale of a dervish called Nahir, who kept a lamp burning outside his cell every night. Visitors believed the flame was an act of charity, a sign that wisdom never sleeps. His disciples said it symbolized divine remembrance, but the truth was less noble. Nahir feared the darkness inside his own house. One evening, he welcomed a soft-spoken traveler who listened with unusual tenderness, praised his verses, and served him with quiet devotion. Weeks passed. Then one morning, the traveler disappeared, taking with him Nahir's journal of prayers and reflections. The dervish ran through the market in fury, demanding justice from strangers who could do nothing for him. But when he returned, breathless and shaking, he found the lamp extinguished. In that darkness he noticed, for the first time, a crack in the back wall, and behind it, the scratching of rats that had been nesting there for years. The theft did not create the corruption. It revealed the place he had refused to inspect. This is why betrayal must be understood as more than an event. It is an exposure. The traitor does not place darkness inside you. He interrupts the light by which you were avoiding it. That is why so many betrayals feel strangely disproportionate. You are not only grieving what happened, you are grieving the collapse of the story that protected you from yourself. Jung would say that what remains unconscious does not vanish. It returns as fate, and betrayal is one of fate's most precise instruments, because it strikes exactly where the ego has built an altar. Perhaps you worshipped being needed. Perhaps you worshipped loyalty, innocence, moral superiority, or the fantasy that love alone can redeem what instinct already mistrusts. The shock breaks the idol. Suddenly you see that your trust was not always openness. Sometimes it was denial wearing sacred clothing. Sometimes your patience was fear of solitude. Sometimes your devotion was only the refusal to let the dream die. This is where the inner Judas first becomes visible, not as evil, but as the force that destroys false unity. Once this inner figure appears, the next temptation is almost always the same: to escape the fire too quickly. Some people run toward vengeance because anger gives structure to chaos. Others rush toward forgiveness, not from wisdom, but from fear of their own rage. Both are evasions. Both protect the ego from the deeper labor. In Hermetic language, there is a symbol for this stage: the vase hermeticum, the sealed vessel in which opposing substances are forced to remain together until transformation begins. Psychologically, this means containment. You do not explode. You do not collapse. You do not turn pain into theater or spirituality into anesthesia. You let grief speak. You let humiliation speak. You let fury speak. But you do not let any of them rule the kingdom. This is the discipline betrayal demands. The soul is asking you to remain inside the chamber long enough to separate reaction from revelation, because hidden inside your strongest emotional surge is usually a buried treasure, a boundary you ignored, a power you surrendered, a self-respect you abandoned just to keep the story alive. At this point, projection becomes the most dangerous corridor. In the beginning, the betrayer appears to be pure darkness, and this is psychologically convenient. If they contain all the evil, then you are spared the discomfort of complexity. But depth psychology warns that intense reactions often signal a disowned energy trying to return. This does not excuse what they did. Their act is theirs. Yet the archetype they activate in you may carry something you exiled long ago. Perhaps they embody the selfishness you never permitted yourself, the ability to choose your own well-being without apology. Perhaps they embody strategic intelligence, the cold discernment you rejected because you wanted to remain good. Perhaps they embody the courage to leave what no longer fits. This is why betrayal can become catalytic rather than merely tragic. It forces a separation between the facts of the wound and the psychic material the wound awakens. In alchemy, after blackening comes separation, dividing truth from fantasy, event from interpretation, their sin from your lesson. That is where the spell begins to break. There is an old story from late antiquity about a philosopher named Marcellin, who wore a bronze key around his neck. He claimed it opened the inward gate of truth. Students traveled across provinces to hear him speak, and over time the key became inseparable from his authority. Before every lecture, he touched it like a priest touching a relic. One evening, in a crowded hall of lamps and dust, he reached for the key and found only the broken chain. His voice failed him. His thoughts scattered. He fled in shame before a crowd that had once adored him. Later he learned the key had been taken not by an enemy, but by his most devoted student, the one who praised him most fervently. When confronted, the student answered, "I stole it because you trusted the symbol more than the truth it was meant to serve." That is the hidden anatomy of betrayal. It removes the talisman, the relationship, the role, the habit, the identity. Whatever you used to steady your fear gets torn away, and then a harsher strength becomes possible. The ability to stand without charms. After the symbol is broken, another battle begins. The battle for attention. Betrayal leaves behind a residue that behaves almost like a spell. You replay conversations. You imagine alternate endings. You check their life from a distance, as if one new detail might finally explain the wound. But this is not understanding. It is psychic captivity. The old occultists would have called it enchantment, a binding of life force to an object charged with unresolved meaning. Jung describes something similar as the withdrawal of libido, the task of reclaiming psychic energy from whatever has become overinvested with emotion. This is why healing cannot remain poetic. It must become practical. You have to ask, what keeps me returning? Rage? Shame? Longing? The fantasy of being vindicated? The fear that if I let go, then the pain meant nothing? Every honest answer is a key, because once you name the hook, you can begin breaking the ritual. Attention is the real currency of the soul. Whatever owns it is shaping your future, and betrayal becomes truly dangerous when it teaches you to feed your past with your entire life. This is where alchemy stops being a metaphor and becomes a discipline of the will. In the whitening stage, albedo, the psyche begins to clear after the storm, and certain humiliating truths rise like sediment in clean water. You realize you were not only attached to a person, you were attached to an image, who they were supposed to be, who you became beside them, what the future promised if the arrangement remained intact. Betrayal shatters all three at once. And with that shattering comes a revelation that feels colder than grief. I was loyal to a fantasy. I mistook intensity for intimacy. I confused familiarity with fate. I defended a narrative against my own body's warnings. This is the difficult mercy of albedo. It does not flatter you. It clarifies you. The inner Judas is no longer merely the force that breaks illusion. It becomes the part of you that refuses self-deception, even at the cost of belonging. In this phase, you stop begging for a different past and begin constructing a different instrument. A nervous system that no longer mistakes chaos for love. Yet clarity brings its own grief. Once the fog lifts, many people discover a wound deeper than the betrayal itself. The grief of self-betrayal. Not only they left or they deceived me, but I abandoned myself to remain inside the story. I ignored the alarm. I negotiated with my instincts. I called self-erasure devotion, because the alternative was solitude. This is why betrayal often reactivates the wounded healer pattern Jung described. We cling to familiar suffering because it gives the ego a role, the loyal one, the fixer, the one who endures. The role feels meaningful, even noble. But when betrayal destroys that role, panic rises from underneath it. If I am no longer the rescuer, the patient one, the endlessly understanding one, then who am I? This is the real terror of the dark night. Not merely rejection, but the collapse of an identity built around being chosen, needed, or approved. And so the work here is quiet, almost monastic. Grief without performance, mourning without spectacle, an honest burial of the self that survived by pretending not to know. After this mourning, a new operation becomes possible. Conjunctio, the alchemical marriage. Not romance, but integration. Betrayal splits the psyche at first. One part of you wants to harden into suspicion, to become unreachable, untouchable, beyond surprise. Another part still longs for tenderness, trust, and human warmth. If you identify with only one side, you remain divided. You become either innocent again in the same dangerous way, or armored beyond love. But the deeper work asks for a third position. The Hermetic masters understood that transformation requires the union of opposites, not the victory of one over the other. Jung called this the transcendent function, the emergence of a wiser stance that can hold contradiction without collapsing. In practical terms, it means you learn a rarer art. You become warm, but not porous. Open, but not naive. Compassionate, but not available for violation. You no longer confuse forgiveness with return, or empathy with self-abandonment. This is the first taste of inner sovereignty. Softness with structure, mercy with discernment, love without self-erasure. Then comes rubedo, the reddening. The stage where insight must enter the body, or it remains decorative philosophy. This is the test most people fail. They understand the lesson intellectually, yet continue the same tiny betrayals in daily life. And the inner Judas rarely returns with a dramatic face. More often it appears as a small bargain. One more message to the person who already proved unsafe, one more night of numbing instead of feeling, one more compromise against your own standards, one more delay in the life you know you should begin. 30 coins do not always look like greed. Sometimes they look like comfort, distraction, nostalgia, or the secret pleasure of remaining wounded, because pain still gives identity. So rubedo asks a practical question. What must change in your habits for this pattern to lose its home inside you? This is where alchemy becomes behavioral. You interrupt the impulse. You delay the compulsion. You redirect the energy into action, movement, prayer, journaling, building, study, silence. Not because these acts are symbolic, but because they reteach the soul that power returns through practice. At the end of this path, betrayal reveals its final secret. It was never only about the person who hurt you. It was about the structure in you that could no longer survive unchanged. In Neoplatonic language, betrayal is a descent into fragmentation, the breaking apart of a false unity. But if you endure the descent consciously, it becomes the beginning of return. Not a return to innocence, because innocence cannot protect you. A return to essence, to something older than performance, older than fear, older than the hunger to be chosen at any cost. This is why the inner Judas is such a dangerous and necessary archetype. It appears wherever a false self must die, sometimes through another's treachery, sometimes through your own relapse, sometimes through the quiet erosion of your days, when you keep postponing the life that asks to be lived. But if you meet this force without fleeing into hatred or fantasy, the wound changes function. It stops being a prison and becomes an opening. And through that opening, a rarer gold begins to appear. Not invulnerability, but integrity. The philosopher's stone of a human being who can remain present in pain without selling the soul for relief.